The night is dark and full of fear. Ghoul Realm invites you to a realm where the line between humans and monsters is blurred. Get ready to face your fears as we tell the harrowing story of Kim Tae-young, who finds himself trapped in the clutches of an unforgiving forest and its terrifying inhabitants. This is EP2 of Ghoul Realm. Thank you for your subscription and likes. I hope you can leave your thoughts in the comments section. 9 Ghoul. The night was dark as ever, leaving no trace of light to see the little things around them. Tae-young was still very much awake while the others slept like a log. But even in that state, his hands didn't leave the silver hairs and the lean waist for a single moment. Come on, sleep now, Tae-young. Getting irritated, he snapped at himself internally, not wanting to unintentionally interrupt the other's sweet dreams. After a lot of internal fighting, he finally started feeling a bit drowsy inside, nuzzling in the warmth of the buff chest when something cold touched his nose. Before he could think, a loud growl echoed in the eerie silence, making him flinch so badly that Jungkook groaned in his sleep. Cursing himself, he softly patted Jungkook's chest, with a hope that will lull him to sleep, and it did happen, but only the hold over his waist got a bit tighter. Not minding that, he simply tried to sleep again while the low growls continued at a distance. The warmth around his body was missing when he opened his eyes. Surprisingly, it was already day, but a more gloomy one. The light from the window was duller than the normal times, making him frown. "Are you awake?" A soft hand brushed his bangs away from his forehead, causing his eyes to shift to the raven-haired, standing near the bed and smiling at him, oh so gently. The gesture should have made him awkward or irritated, but on the contrary, he felt his cheeks getting warm. "Am I blushing?" Blinking many times, he shot up on the bed and touched his cheeks to feel the warmth. Jungkook cocked his one brow and stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest. "Okay, that's hella awkward. Get your grip, Kim Tae-young." Shaking his head, he got up from the bed, ready to go to the bathroom when Jungkook chuckled. "So you're still sleepy?" He hummed to himself, and when Tae-young turned back, the former just laughed out loudly, too amused by the view. The cute bed hairs, pout, and red flaming cheeks were a sight to be amused. "What? No, I'm very much awake," Tae-young protested weakly, getting embarrassed by the way other was staring at him. "But you just shook your head at my question." Sighing to himself, Tae-young quickly rushed inside the bathroom to wash his now red tomato face. "There isn't any reason to blush. Stupid. Idiot." Scolding a little, he finally came out of the bathroom to see Jungkook placing the basket on the bed, wiping the fruits with a small clean rag in his hands. "It's raining since early morning." When Jungkook mentioned it, he noticed the gloomy feeling was because of that. "Ah, I see." Dismissing the fact how much he disliked the rains and all, he just sat beside the other to have his breakfast. "It reminds me of the tropical rainforest," Tae-young added to the previous words that made Jungkook scrunch his nose. "Not like I went there before. It's raining and it's a forest, just assume that the area is tropical." He shrugged his shoulders before stuffing his mouth with red berries. "Are you really a reporter?" Jungkook asked, or more like fake mocked the younger, who again shrugged. "I was always the curious one, wanted to know about the hidden things. At first I thought of being a detective, but then I found out about my phobia. I can't stand blood and all." Chuckling in embarrassment, he licked his lips, but to his surprise, a warm hand grabbed his free one, squeezing it gently. Feeling better with the gesture, he continued. "So in the end I decided to be a reporter and studied it all. It's cool as far as I'm only involved in the interviews and some political issues." Jungkook nodded lightly. There was a little span of silence when both ate in peace until a loud thunder echoed in the silence, causing the window glass to clatter. Tae-young lightly flinched but gritted his teeth to look very much collected. The loud thunder just continued until the rain turned harsher, even hitting the window glass loudly. "This isn't good." Jungkook frowned, keeping the basket aside before going to the door to be splashed by the rain right on his face when he opened it. Tae-young also finished his apple before keeping the basket back on the table and walking to the door. The rain was really very heavy, like one he never witnessed before. "Let's go before ghouls come out." Tae-young quickly pipped in, eyes kinda excited. "I don't know, but sure. Let's try it." Just like that, they were ready to leave the cabin, Jungkook in front of Tae-young. The rain was really very harsh and made most of the view blur wherever there weren't many trees. They tried their best to cover their bags with the little plastic that Taeyong had in his bag. The soil was already very slippery, and Taeyong really had to grip Jungkook's jacket to stop himself from falling. They kept on walking till the first mark and found nothing as the previous day. Even the second mark was also safe. The rain was quite cold, but both of them didn't care about that, too much immersed in their goals. "I think they're not here," Taeyong whispered through his gritted teeth that were almost clattering with the cold. Jungkook only nodded, face still facing in front of him. The usual stench of blood and flesh wasn't much this time. Thanks to the rain that it all smelled like soil. "Come on, be quick before they're back." The excitement of leaving the horrid place was clear from his words and tone. All he wanted was to leave the forest with Jungkook and go back to his cozy small apartment before barging inside his friend's house and spending the night there. Jungkook slightly turned back and offered his left hand to him as his right hand had his knife, ready to defend itself. Without any hesitation, he took the hand and felt the little squeeze as they continued walking and kept walking. The soil was just getting more and more slippery as they entered the thicker area of the forest. Large and very tall trees were standing with all their might, even stopping the harshness of the rain. By that time, Taeyong was badly shivering as the cold air started abusing their wet bodies. "You're so cold, Taeyong," Jungkook said, very concerned as the hand was practically ice cold in his grip. "It's okay, just don't stop." Taeyong smiled widely and continued stepping forth, but was tugged backward and ended up in the other's arms. "What dash?" A hand covered his mouth, stopping his word midway. When he turned on his side, Jungkook's head was near his ear. "Stay silent and step back carefully." Taeyong frowned and tried to uncover his mouth, but the hand just pressed more. "Stop, pretty boy." Jungkook kind of warned him and started dragging him back. Taeyong's heart almost dropped as he could feel like they were near the boundary of the forest after so much walking, and now the older was saying him to back off. Shaking his head, he put all his energy to push back the older to be only tugged back harshly. He glared at the older, who had very much the same expression, his face wet and dark hairs falling over his eyes, giving off a very scary aura. He pointed with his eyes in a specific direction. With a deep frown, Taeyong again tried to free himself from the grip over his chest and arms but failed. He turned his eyes in the direction. His heart dropped for real this time with his hopes once again. The scene in front of him was enough to make him step backward unconsciously. Thanks to Jungkook, who handled him perfectly. There weren't a few ghouls but a whole big group of them, standing in a row around the whole boundary line like they were guarding the forest. They had their eyes focused on the soil as something disgusting was dripping from their open mouths. Some were scraping the tree trunks, nails scratching the bark in an animalistic way, while the others were just standing, looking like they were sniffing the air. His previous encounter with those horrible creatures and their actions made him feel queasy, afraid, and sad. All of his anger and irritation turned into utter distress and fear that he couldn't even reach the boundary to have his freedom. They couldn't reach their goal. "Let's get back," Jungkook again whispered, to which he nodded instantly. But when they turned back, they found a girl standing there with a gun in her hand. She smirked, stepping a bit forth to leave a little distance between them before aiming the gun at them. "You're not going anywhere, gentlemen." 10 deadly. Taeyong was beyond surprised to see another human in the same deadly forest. "Move if you want to live." A deep yet whispering sound came out behind him, and the voice was definitely of Jungkook. The girl who was standing in front of them chuckled lowly. Her eyes gleamed with something that the silver-haired couldn't understand. She looked so excited for some reason. Her looks were so soft, but her aura was so different. She looked so deadly, just like the forest. "Good to see some normal beings in this ****** place, but you know what?" she whispered again, slightly leaning forward before loading the gun. "They seem hungry." With that, she pushed Taeyong, but Jungkook was quick to hold him before he could fall. Even before they could compose themselves, loud gunfire resonated in the forest. Taeyong felt his heart stop beating the moment he heard the gunfire and found the other over his body as they both fell on the side, their bodies rolling over the mud. "Young!" Jungkook groaned when the blood started flowing from the wound that he got on his left leg, right on his thigh. "Damn!" The low curse only made the silver-haired worried as he could feel the death stares of the now very much attentive ghouls. "No, no, no." The chant was continuous, but the girl in front of them seemed very happy about what she did. "See, they're drooling over you." she pointed out, her smirk not leaving her slightly chapped lips. Jungkook just groaned again when he noticed the ghouls now moving towards them, or more like rushing while pushing each other. Young. If it wasn't for the terrifying voice of the younger, he could have spent more time in the same posture. But when he noticed the widened eyes fixed on the blood leaking from his wound, he cursed more before lifting his body. Nuhu. Stay boys, let them a feast. Her voice made the Revent only angry, but when he tried to attack her with the knife he kept to himself. Taeyong beat him to that and tripped her by kicking her knee. Jungkook gave him a glance but took a quick move to snatch the gun from her and shoot her leg instead, which left the silver-haired in pure shock. Her agonizing scream echoed, mixed with the now increasing growls of the ghouls who almost reached there with their uneven steps. Let's go. Jungkook was totally alarmed by the decreasing distance between them, but Taeyong seemed too much in shock, seeing the girl withering in pain on the ground while trying to reach them. Taeyong. Jungkook had to yell before dragging the boy, but because of his injury, he collapsed after a few steps, and that's when Taeyong gathered himself before helping him with his trembling hands. Taeyong tried his best to support the other and make a good distance from the half-dead creatures when he heard the loud screams of the girl. On instinct, he turned his head only to regret it, as the view was so much traumatic to ever forget. There, the ghouls were surrounding the wounded girl and were pushing each other to feast on her flesh and blood. His eyes were frozen on the view as the blood started to pool around the girl and under half-rotten feet of the creatures. Good thing he couldn't see the face or body of the girl, but the blood was enough to trigger him. Don't look. Jungkook softly whispered near his ear while supporting himself with the help of a tree trunk. She needs help. They will eat her. Young. The broken words, shaking voice, and trembling body of the younger was enough sight to bear, so Jungkook sighed in pain before dragging the other again, limping towards the cabin. She dashed. Another loud painful scream echoed and ghouls growled like they were celebrating having some flesh, and that made the silver-haired only sick. She wanted to make us their food, but her plan backfired. Jungkook hissed as he quickened his steps, his blood making a tail behind them, mixing with the mud. Arg! Taeyong snapped out of his trance when the older winced loudly, almost collapsing. Taking hold of himself, he tried to help the other again, pushing back the loud screams of the girl that were very much haunting. Jungkook's eyes started to droop when they were near the cabin, and then Taeyong realized the amount of blood the older was losing because of the rain. He quickened his speed, avoiding the red on the ground as he could feel his stomach churning and head spinning at the sight. Opening the cabin door, both of them collapsed on the floor. Jungkook winced in pain while Taeyong was trying to hold his breakfast, but he lost it and rushed towards the bathroom to throw up every ounce of food inside his stomach. Unlike the last time, he tried his best to keep himself awake when he continued vomiting out the contents until he couldn't. Washing his mouth and face, he tried to calm down. His whole body was still shaking badly. The mind was half numb as only the pooling blood was in front of his eyes. No. He again chanted, trying to shake off the horrible scenes from his sight, but it only worsened when his knees gave up. At that moment he noticed his shallow breathing. Pretty boy? A very weak voice Jungkook called him, but he was too much traumatized to even speak back. That girl is dead because he shot her. The screaming of the girl was echoing in his mind, but the other called him again, more softly this time. Taeyong. He is in pain, he is calling you Tae, he saved you. Please stop it. Stop it. Calm down. Calm down. He tried to take deep breaths, but his lungs refused to take any oxygen, suffocating him. At the end, he was badly gasping when the door opened and an arm wrapped around his torso and one hand covered his eyes. Shoo. It's okay. Jungkook spoke, keeping his breathing normal as he could feel the other already having a very bad panic attack. Let's go. He tried to make him stand, and fortunately, Taeyong felt the warmth of the other before getting up and walking out of the bathroom as the other guided him to the bed. Young, your leg, I'm so sorry. His eyes were still covered with the same hand when he heard another wince from the other. A finger stopped him from speaking any further. Keep your eyes closed for a moment till I say. Taeyong was dumbfounded by the demand as he tried to breathe again, as a soothing hand was now caressing his chest that was placed over his mouth a few seconds ago. Okay, pretty boy. Taeyong was hesitant but nodded his head, which felt heavy, and the hand slowly pulled back. Gee, good. Jungkook praised him with a broken chuckle. Now breathe in and breathe out. Everything is fine. Taeyong followed his words as Jungkook kept on talking to him for a while till he said him to open his eyes. It's okay, open them. When the other felt the hesitation, he said. Taeyong opened his eyes slowly. His breathing was still quickened, but at least he could feel his surroundings more now. Young. Jungkook smiled, even when he looked pale from the blood loss, but he still managed to give a soft smile to him, making him feel guilty for some reason. Whatever happened in the past hour was more than traumatic. Ever since he entered that deadly place, everything was just adding to his trauma. Everything was just downfall except the revenge. Except Jungkook. His teary eyes were focused on now the messily wrapped wound of the older, who tried his best to hide every spot of blood. The wound was clearly deep and painful, yet the other was trying to soothe him, which only made him feel like an idiot. He felt responsible because Jungkook jumped over him to save him from the bullet even though he shot the girl. That was for their safety. Hey, don't cry, it's fine. Taeyong's eyes were already leaking tears and his lips wobbling. His mind was now getting filled with many questions and many words, but chose not to voice them out. Instead, he voiced out the guilt. That's my fault, Dash. No. Jungkook took a deep breath after the single word and cupped the other's face delicately after wiping his hands over his wet pant. I wanted to keep you safe. He breathed out and Taeyong let out a choked sob on that, and was already breaking down when he was pulled into a warm embrace. They both were still wet, but none of them cared. The warmth of their bodies was enough to calm each other even in that place, even at that moment. Shoo! A small peck was left on his ear shell, and he felt like crying more because he just wanted to live normally like before. I'm okay, pretty boy. Just a bit tired. Taeyong panicked when the grip over his shoulders started to loose. Hyung. I'm fine. Fine. Jungkook mumbled as his body fell over the other completely, who was still in a state of panic. Jungkook Hyung. 11. Hope. The darkness in the room only increased with the passage of time. There was just the sound of rain hitting the leaves and the window, dead silence inside the cabin except for the little breathing sound coming out from the two. Taeyong wasn't sure about the time, but he knew that it was almost hours since the other was out cold, laying beside him, still pale and unlike before, warmer because of the fever. God knows how he got the courage to actually clean the other and change his wet clothes with his own dry ones from his bag, and tied up the wound in a better way. Little bit of his training came into the hand. He was keeping his eyes closed when he did so, but one thing made him feel much better. There wasn't any bullet. The bullet passed through the flesh but didn't penetrate. Even though they were fortunate by that miracle, but still he was panicking because he couldn't treat the wound like it was in need. He couldn't leave the cabin to search for some herbs. He wasn't very good with the plants and all. Moreover, he wasn't planning to leave the other alone. His head was still heavy with all the traumatic events, and the gross sight of blood left him in dire need of some good sleep, but he was trying his best to stay awake. A little groan from the other made him whip his head to his right to see the other waking up. Hyung. He softly yet desperately called the other, and luckily, he got a response this time that he couldn't in the past hours. Hey. The voice was deep and hoarse, yet there was that calm aura. Taeyong let out a sigh of relief and lifted his cold hand to check the other's temperature, which was a bit better than before after he placed wet clothes on the forehead. After getting a water bottle, he made the other drink from it. It's better. Mumbling to himself, he let out another deep sigh before leaning back on the wall, but jolted in surprise when his hand was gripped by a warm hand. You're still wearing these wet clothes. Why? Surprisingly, Jungkook's voice came out much better than a moment ago after he took another sip from the bottle. Hesitantly, the silver-haired pulled his hand back and wrapped his arms around his own torso. There aren't any more dry clothes and they're almost dry. Referring to his still wet clothes, he stated calmly. But to his surprise, the other got up with a little grunt and removed the shirt he was wearing, and placed it on his lap. Change into this, you'll get sick. It was like an order, but he was already feeling mixed emotions. Burden, guilt, anger, confusion, and regret were making his senses go wild. I'm already sick of this place. Jungkook frowned at the loud voice, but he noticed the trembling hands of the younger. Are you angry? He softly asked, taking the cold hands in his own warm ones and caressing the skin gently. Yes, I'm so much angry. I'm angry at myself for leaving the cabin. I'm angry because we couldn't leave this hell. I'm feeling awful because you're injured now because of me. I'm angry at myself for pushing that girl while she could be alive by now. I'm angry at you for shooting her. I'm feeling like a murderer. Do you hear that? I'm feeling like a murderer. The outburst left the silver-haired huffing and breathing heavily, but the older kept his eyes focused on the still trembling hands. I shot her to save ourselves. Jungkook softly replied and scooted closer to the younger who was still breathing heavily, on the verge of crying. Taking a careful approach, he softly grabbed the other's wet shirt hem and tugged it. I want to protect you. He pushed the younger lightly on the mattress while pulling the shirt up till it reached the upper torso, exposing the gleaming skin. And I'll do anything to do so. The words left the younger in a sort of daze that he couldn't even protest when the shirt was already touching his chin. Can I? Jungkook asked, referring to removing the shirt completely in the same daze. Taehyung tilted his head a bit and the wet shirt was already removed, making him shiver at the sudden exposure. Jungkook was busy in taking the other shirt when Taehyung carefully observed many scars on the other's torso, and that pendant. Lift your head a bit. Taehyung blinked and suddenly felt awkward in their position. Jungkook was half leaning over him with exposed skin and he was laying beneath him. Shaking his head, he quickly got up, snatched the shirt from the other's hand, and quickly pulled it down to hide his body. Jungkook chuckled but kept quiet as he leaned back on the wall as well, silently observing his wrapped wound. You did that. Taehyung nodded his head, avoiding eye contact. Jungkook frowned and looked around to find no trace of blood or any dirty cloth. Why you did do it all? Could have triggered you again. I'm fine. You need to rest. Ignoring the concerned tone, Taehyung retorted and turned his back to the other before laying there. His mind was in deep chaos and the previous outburst was a little glimpse of that. He was mad at Jungkook for shooting the girl but at the same time grateful for saving him. The previous words of the older were ringing in his ears, making his mind more chaotic. It wasn't like he didn't like the other's presence, but the time and place weren't suitable. Everything was messing up with his mind. The silver-haired was still in his own pool of thoughts when an arm wrapped around his waist and in the next second, he was pulled back, hitting the other's chest. Stop thinking about that all. Sleep for a while, you also need it. The whisper-like tone made him shiver as the hot breath was hitting his ear and nape. When he tried to free himself, the other just pulled him back more. Please stay like this for a while, Jungkook requested. Taehyung slightly flinched but felt relaxed when the other nuzzled his nose on his nape and started caressing his torso with his hand. Why do you care about me? We barely know each other. He blurted out his thoughts. The hand on his torso stilled for a mini-second before the movement was back. In this eerie place you came like a ray of hope. A hope that I can leave and have a normal life again. How can I not like this hope? Taehyung felt speechless at that and decided to stay silent till the chaos in his mind started to settle a bit before numbing him. The warmth coming from the other's exposed body was enough to subside his shivering and coldness, and to melt the webs in his mind. Even though the time was bad, there was hope. Like the other was using him as a ray, he was also depending on him in some way. With that thought, his body started falling into a deep slumber, ignoring all the chaos in the arms of the Revent. 12 questions. The whole time, both were silent as the rain continued. Clouds pouring out all the miseries they were carrying on. Raindrops were falling and still hitting the window as the silver-haired simply stayed in the arms of the Revent who was still fast asleep. Their bodies were pressed against each other. His back still stuck with the other's naked chest, sharing their warmth. Soft and warm breaths were hitting his nape and the right arm of the other was still wrapped around his waist, keeping him in place. A soft sigh left his now chapped lips when the horrible day flashed again in front of his eyes. He did fall asleep in the afternoon but woke up again to the loud thunder as he had a very terrifying nightmare. Since then, he was just laying there because the other seemed quite comfortable, and waking up the other was the last thing he wanted to do. He shot her to save us, but that killed her. Again, the same thoughts swirled around his mind that was getting stuck in the storm of the incident happened before, leaving him in deep emotions. By the look, she was very rowdy and cold, yet she looked like a victim in her last time. His body shivered, the blood pool that came out of her body looked fresh in his sight. Shaking the image, he chewed his lips harshly. What was she doing here? Another question that no one could answer at the moment. His brows frowned when he recalled her expressions. She definitely looked way more relaxed even when the whole horde of ghouls was standing there. Suddenly, something clicked in his mind. Her gaze was kind of fixed on Hyung like she knew him or... Pretty boy? His very hoarse and deep voice made him shiver as the lips brushed over his sensitive skin. Taeyong closed his eyes, heart beating rather quickly when the grip over his waist tightened more and his body was now flushed against the other. Are you okay? Jungkook again asked, his voice soft yet cold. He is concerned about me when he is the one injured now. Feeling some mixed emotions, the younger took a deep breath before turning his head slightly. His breath hitched at the close proximity, their faces only a few inches apart as the other held eye contact, firm yet soft. Taeyong gulped thickly, feeling his throat getting dry when his eyes observed the other closely. There was a very prominent mole just under the bow-shaped lips, perfectly inclined nose bridge, and those eyes, those sharp and doe eyes that held the galaxies in deep hole, black hole that was yet to be understood. A throaty chuckle left the other's lips that literally pulled the younger back to reality. Are you checking me out, pretty boy? Taeyong blinked in a daze as the word took a little while to seep down his skin. Even in the dark room, Jungkook was able to feel the warmth spreading over the other's cheeks before he let out a squeal. What? No. Jungkook frowned when Taeyong dragged his body a bit away from him but gasped when he was on the edge. If it wasn't for the Raven's quick response, the other might have just kissed the wooden floor. Easy boy. Taeyong kept quiet when he hastily got up from the laying position, the older following him with a little grunt. It must be hurting a lot. What should I do? We have nothing to treat it properly or subside the pain. Jungkook sighed, his eyes falling on the temporary bandage on his thigh. It's not that bad. You did a good job in covering it up, puppy. The pet name left the younger gaping in shock, but the older seemed unfazed as he tried to get up on his own. Taeyong quickly helped him as he went to the bathroom while he himself looked in the basket to find it almost empty. I need to get the fruits. The weather was still gloomy as before with lesser rainfall, but the good thing was the lack of the usual growling of the beasts. He patiently waited till the other came out of the bathroom and helped him back to the bed. One of the older shirts was now kinda dry, so he handed him that to wear. I'll get the fruits, you just rest. He was ready to turn when his wrist was tugged backward. I'll come with you. What? No, I can manage. You said that the trees are just behind the cabin. I can do that, at least. The disappointment was clear from his tone and words, which made the older to softly caress his skin in a soothing manner. You staying beside me is the best thing ever. You're already doing a lot, don't worry about doing more. As I just want you safe and healthy. Taeyong smiled lightly on hearing the encouragement. You're a nice man, Hyung. Jungkook chuckled and shook his head. What about you, little puppy? In embarrassment, Taeyong softly jerked his hand away from the other and ruffled his own hair. Don't call me that. Jungkook smirked, leaning back on the wall. He hummed. Then? What should I call you when you show me those puppy eyes and that pretty face? Where is the emergency light? We placed it near the chair, but I can't find it now. Taeyong quickly changed the topic because deep down he was sure he liked every pet name the other was blurting out. Jungkook again chuckled, clearly understanding the other's actions to divert his words, but he just let it happen. I placed it here. He guided the other, who finally get that and took the basket. It's still raining, cover yourself. Taeyong's lips curved up in a sad smile, but he nodded before leaving the cabin. The words reminded him of his Jin Hyung, who always acted like his real brother and was always overprotective. I miss you, Hyung. It was already getting darker as the sun had set and the deep clouds left not much light. The loud splashes of rain turned into soft drizzling. In natural instinct, he quickly looked around to find only tall trees, soaking in the rain and large puddles of water. Let's get it. Encouraging himself, he stepped forth carefully not to slip on the mud and turned around the corner. It was the first time that he was going to that side of the forest, and for some reason, his heart was continuously beating furiously. There is nothing to worry about, just get over your stupid fear. Encouragement turned into scolding when he found his feet frozen on the same spot, soft raindrops falling over his hair. After a minute or two, he heaved out a deep breath and finally took another turn to gasp in surprise. There stand many fruit trees, most of them laden with delicious food. But what caught his attention was the extended boundary of the cabin. It looked small from the inside. The cabin wasn't shaped like a cube, but there was a large portion that was covering more area. He stepped forward to get the fruits, but his gaze was going back to the cabin. Maybe that's the part of the cabin which is locked. The door beside the bathroom. He concluded, nodding to himself as he filled the basket, mostly with berries and apples, leaving that mysterious fruit behind. But his curiosity was poking inside, making him look around more, but the spreading darkness and chilling wind said otherwise. In the end, he decided to look around the next day in the morning, as he was going to do this job till the other heals. Little did know, some piercing eyes were fixed on his each and every move till he finally entered the cabin again. Maybe someone who can answer his questions, all of his questions. 13 Reality? The night was deep when Taeyong opened his eyes to the loud growling of the beasts in the jungle. The loud growls and howling snatched his sleep away when he just fell asleep after making sure that the older was comfortable. As the coldness was increasing after the heavy rain and cold wind, and the other's leg was exposed because of the messy bandage, he collected all the clothes and made a temporary cover with them, tucking the older one inside that. Shut up. The silver-haired groaned, his voice groggy and sleepy but still low in volume, very careful not to disturb the other. The growls continued and he let out a sigh of defeat when he lost the last ounce of sleep from his eyes. When he turned his head a bit, he found the other's face slightly close, his face not so clear because of the darkness, but still, he could feel the features. He kept on laying in the same position until his throat felt dry. The room was dark and the rain had stopped completely, leaving only the growls of the ghouls in the eerie jungle. Taking a deep breath, he got up from the bed and let his feet touch the cold wooden floor of the cabin. Tracing his hands over the edge of the bed, he moved around to get to the table and grabbed the bottle placed on the floor. When he took a few sips from it, he heard a thud coming from the outside of the cabin. At first, he thought to ignore that, but when another one came right after the previous one, he gulped in fear. An animal or ghoul? In nervousness, he started chewing his lower lips while capping the bottle again before placing it back on the floor. Another soft thud came and in an instinct, he looked back to find the older still out cold. What should I do? Many scenarios were going wild inside his head. There wasn't any chance to have some animal, as he didn't see a single one since he came to the cursed place, but there could be some poor soul, wandering to save their life, or maybe a ghoul. But as the Revent said, ghouls never crossed a certain limit. A survivor? Gasping in his own thoughts, he quickly took hold of the emergency light and took slow steps to go to the door, but halted. What if a wandering ghoul is doing so? This would be like suicide. His head again turned back to see the older, of course, who wasn't in the position to defend himself or help him in any way. The voice continued with the growls, but he didn't hear any growl from a close distance. But his fears were interrupting his little courage, and in the end, he just went back to bed. The whole night, he kept on hearing voices like someone was definitely outside of their cabin, and the growls continued as well. He couldn't even blink peacefully for the night, and just when he thought that the sun was about to come out, he finally fell asleep as the noises came to a stop. Next time when he opened his eyes, it was already daytime, and found the bed empty beside him, sending him into a state of panic. What? Hyung? His feet quickly took him to check the bathroom, but found that empty. The door of the cabin was closed, but he couldn't think of anything else and just marched out of the little space to look around. It was the second time that he was looking for the Revent, but his heart was still feeling like before, or worse than the last time. The whole ground was still muddy and slippery, but it couldn't stop the silver-haired to run around. Hyung dash. He almost crossed the fence, but the horrible view made him step backward. The same girl from yesterday, as he could see her clothes were laying in pieces in front of the fence. Her face was distorted as the head was laying at a distance. Her hands were also a few steps away, and her body with torn clothes was just in front of his eyes. Oh my God. A low mumble left his parted lips, eyes still focused on the distorted face. Those eyes, those piercing eyes that were sharp till yesterday, were now blown wide. Eyeballs rolled back to her head and only leaving the white portion to be seen. Blood was still sticking in some places even when the skin was ghostly white. Taeyong was standing still. The view left him in terror. The terrifying view from yesterday was still fresh in his sight, and now this just made his mind blank. It took a while for him to understand that his breathing was already picking up the pace, and at the end, his knees gave up, making him fall over the mud with a low thud. The bile in his stomach started to poke his throat, making him gag a few times, but nothing came out as he barely ate anything last night. Calm do down. He choked on his words, his shaky hands trying to cover his eyes, but seems like the whole body was out of order. Young. Suddenly, he recalled the purpose to leave the safe haven that was the cabin and the called person. Even when his voice was betraying him, he again called the other. He didn't know what to do or how to do it. All he could do was call the other while trying to get up. After trying many times, he managed to get up on his wobbly feet and rushed backward. Hyung! Jongkuk-hyung! He was crying at the point, but no tears came out, eyes too tired to even let them out. One time he rushed forward and the other moment he would glance back. He just wanted to see the other safe and sound. But in the condition the other was, he was already feeling mixed emotions about his prayer. When he took the turn, he felt the ground slip away from his feet, because the area was devoid of any human beings. His shaky hands harshly grabbed his silver bangs, pulling them when the word no continued to fall from his lips. There was no way the other could go any further, also when the way was filled with the stinky remains of the poor girl. Shaking his head to get rid of many scenarios in his mind, he rushed back to the cabin and closed the door in haste. Slowly, the events from the last night knocked on his memory, reminding him of the voices that he heard near the cabin. New puzzles started to form in his mind even when the last questions were answered. Did something happen when I was sleeping? How did her body come there? Was there actually someone outside? Blinking his eyes, he rushed back to the bathroom to find it again empty. Then his eyes fell on the other door, the one which was still closed. Another thought crossed his mind, but he quickly shook it off. But the curiosity still made him look a bit more in the cabin, and when he couldn't find the things he was looking for, his body slumped back on the bed like no energy left. There wasn't the bag of Jungkook. His knife, water bottle, and fruits were gone from the basket as well. Only his own clothes were scattered on the bed that he used last night to cover the older one. The last thought he could believe in was looking bitter, or more like another horrible reality at the moment. The words were itching on his tongue, but he still held them until they slipped out in disbelief. Did he leave me alone? 14. Nightmare. The little rattling was continuously disturbing the silence of the cabin. There wasn't much warmth, but still, he wanted to just curl more and sleep off his pain, the pain he was feeling after being betrayed by the older. When the noise didn't stop for another minute, he shot up from the uncomfortable bed to eradicate the source of the bothersome voice. His hazy eyes scanned the room to find it like before, without any other being inside. Leaving the bed with an annoyed expression, he trudged towards the door of the cabin as the noise was coming from outside. Frowning to himself, he took another step forward but halted as many alarming thoughts crossed his already messed up mind. He might be overthinking at this point, but whatever had happened already made him kinda cautious of his every move. Moreover, there wasn't anyone who can help him now. The noise stopped suddenly, making him blink in surprise, but before he could open the door, someone turned him around, almost giving him a heart attack. A loud shrill scream left his lips, but his voice almost vanished when he saw the one standing, now in front of him with a frown. Am I dreaming again? The first thought came and went away like the wind. It was surprising to find the raven-haired older standing right in front of him when he found no trace of him before. Pretty boy. The other softly called him, but he was too shocked to respond. His shocked gaze racked from the other's face to his leg, only to find him standing on one leg, his injured one sort of hanging in the air with the same bandage he had done last night. Jungkook was still in those clothes that he gave him last night to cover him. Then his eyes moved around the cabin to find the fruit basket back on the table with a few fruits and Jungkook's bag laying near the bed as well. A rough yet warm hand softly patted his cheek, getting his attention only to gaze at those concerned dark orbs. Are you okay? No, I'm not. Yes. He breathed out, still not confirming which part is actually his nightmare. Jungkook didn't look much satisfied with his answer, so he patted his shoulder lightly, a gesture to walk back to the bed as he was facing difficulties in standing with his injury. Taeyong followed his silent demand and both of them ended up on the bed, facing each other. Now tell me, what's wrong with you? You look awfully shocked. The raven-haired moved a bit closer, wincing lightly in the process, but in the end, he left no space between them. Taeyong was again silent, not knowing how to say his words loud. It was very much normal to freak out in the situation he was, but still, he wasn't so much a coward to lose his head completely. Everything was so real, he could still feel how he was trembling in fear when he couldn't find the other. It was so clear how his mind went almost blank when he saw the dead body of that girl. That girl. The first word he breathed out before sprinting out of the cabin, not even caring about anything else. Hey! Tae-Jungkook became quiet when he saw the other rushing towards the fence, only to step back in what seemed like another shock. Taeyong felt his mind spinning for a moment when he found no trace of the dead body on the ground. No pieces, no blood, nothing at all. But it felt so real. It was really difficult to believe that it was all his nightmare, or maybe hallucination. Taeyong, come inside. It's already evening. Jungkook shrieked from inside, struggling to walk out of the cabin, but Taeyong was quick to walk back to save the other's energy. Once Jungkook was again back on the bed, Taeyong plopped in front of him after locking the cabin door. He licked his lips nervously, and Jungkook was quick to understand. Did you get a nightmare? You were sleeping for so long, and even whimpered a few times. Hearing those words, Taeyong was already sure that he must have lost a piece of mind, or simply peace of mind. I'm getting crazy. He mumbled in a daze, still not believing in everything. Sensing the distress of the silver-haired, Jungkook softly cupped his face and caressed the skin gently, touching just like feathers that made the former melt under that. Hyung, Jungkook hummed, thumbs running over his cheeks to make him believe that he wasn't alone. Am I losing my mind? His own voice came out like a whisper, a broken whisper. Jungkook's thumbs stopped for a brief second before the soothing touch was back. It should be me who is losing my mind, just by your calming presence around me, Jungkook replied, face leaning forward till his nose touched the other's pointed one. Everything will be alright soon. Don't stress about it all, Ichem. Taeyong closed his eyes, feeling every touch that was tingling his heart, feeling the warm breaths that were softly tickling his skin, feeling others' presence. When did you wake up? There were many questions in his mind, but he asked the most sensible one first. Jungkook leaned more, nose brushing against the warm skin until it settled in the crook of the other's neck. Just a while ago, when you were so deep in sleep, he mumbled, his breath fanning over the skin, sending shivers down Taeyong's body, but the latter felt calm. Your warmth made me rest well, he added with a chuckle, but Taeyong couldn't feel like even smiling. There isn't any chance that anyone could clean up the soil bed after moving the dead body. There wasn't any chance that the other would lie to him like that, because he wasn't able to walk a few steps without difficulty. How could he walk out of the cabin? So, there was only one thing left to believe. It was really a bad dream. Concluding to himself, he opened his eyes and found the other's dark hair in view as Jungkook was snuggling onto his neck. Oddly, the position seemed quite comfortable. Their shared body warmth, those warm breaths over his skin, that random tingles in his body on the soft brushes. It was comfortable. It was almost inviting the way Jungkook's hand softly moved downwards and rested over his waist. It was tempting as that hand started pulling him closer, leaving no space at all. But as the other hand slightly moved towards his nape, he pushed the other. Jungkook's eyes widened when the other pushed him back, but his eyes softened immediately when he saw the confusion written on that cute face. Sorry, I got carried away. He sheepishly smiled, hands awkwardly stretching his own nape when his ears turned red. Taeyong again licked his lips and scooted a bit away from the other. Not because he felt uncomfortable, but because he felt too much comfortable, and that left him baffled. It was for the very first time as he was feeling those emotions, and on top of that, with a boy. For a brief moment he forgot about the situation he was in. He forgot about his nightmare, his fears, and even his home. And that made him kinda alarmed, making him push the other away in an instant. Because in the end he had to be back to his previous life. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. Jungkook broke the silence by apologizing, his voice soft and whisper-like. No, it's not like that. It's just the words started to mingle in because he instantly felt bad for giving that impression. Jungkook just cleared his throat and looked around the dimly lit room as the sun was almost setting down. Taeyong also did the same and realized that they hadn't eaten anything for the whole day. He again felt guilty for being so ignorant while the other took care of him so dutifully. "I'm so sorry, Hyung. I'll just get some fruits for you." Before the other could correct him, he hastily left the cabin under the effect of adrenaline. But as he was out with the basket, he felt goosebumps all over his body when his gaze fell over the same spot near the fence. That's really strange. He just wanted to pull his own hair. Just wanted to simply believe that it was a nightmare, but for some reason he couldn't. "I don't want to lose my mind." Grumbling under his breath, he carefully stepped around the cabin to reach the trees. There was much light to look around as the sun had just set. The mud was still very slippery, but he was very cautious, not ready to fall on the ground. Very carefully, he gathered the fruits just like the previous day and quickly rushed back to the cabin. His heart was continuously beating wildly during that whole span. His eyes weren't focused on one thing as the small rustling of the leaves was making him flinch. Once he was back, both of them had their supper in the dim, natural light, and after that, Taeyong decided to have a bath, using the already filled drums in the bathroom. Even when the water was freezing cold, he completed the bath to feel fresh and came out after changing into the other clothes that dried up overnight. He also washed his used clothes as well in the dimly lit bathroom, not noticing the dried mud stains on his pants. 15. Ready, Hyung? Are you feeling any better? Taeyong softly asked, lazily chewing his apple half-heartedly. He used to like apples, but eating them in every meal made him kinda bored. Jungkook gave him a nod, munching on the berries that were almost gone from the basket. They again fell into the silence of the cabin. A soft voice of chewing could be heard, but except that, nothing was there. It was barely half-eaten when Taeyong placed it on his side and just leaned back on the wall, mind still not at ease after the previous day's odd incident, but his heart was pulling strings to keep him sane. "Pretty boy. What's wrong with your little brain now?" Jungkook's voice dragged him out of his little trance. The other was looking at him expectantly for a satisfactory answer, but he couldn't give him one. "I don't know, it's just nothing." He heaved out a heavy sigh, a deep frown setting on his flawless face. Noticing the distress of the younger, Jungkook quickly finished his breakfast and placed the basket on the floor before scooting near the other. He whimpered lowly at the stinging pain in his thigh, but still managed to get the seat he wanted to have. Taeyong closed his eyes when he felt the other coming inside his bubble, but suddenly fall into the ocean of ease when rough but soothing touch started to spread across his scalp. "Don't be so stressed about anything." Taeyong kept his mouth shut as the other kept on muttering sweet words near his ear. That warm breath fanning over his skin, making his body fill up with goosebumps, but in a good way. It was so difficult to not be stressed under the circumstances he was going through. Last night, after bathing, he couldn't blink for the whole night while the older slept peacefully even after he just woke up a few hours ago. Considering the weakness and exhaustion the reason, Taeyong let him sleep while fighting his thoughts. Whenever he tried to close his eyes, it always showed the unwanted and horrified glimpse of the dead girl, scratching the little remnants of sleep from his eyes. He was exhausted, not physically but mentally. Everything was just getting on his nerves, literally. "You are so handsome, Taeyong." The other took him off guard by his words. Avoiding the loud thump in his heart that happened on the words, the silver-haired opened his eyes only to fall into the abyss of the dark ones that were already staring down his soul. "What?" His voice came out like a whisper, like he was in some sort of daze, a daze of falling in those charcoal orbs. Jungkook bit his lips. Something unknown sparkled in his eyes before a sweet smile formed on his perfectly shaped lips. "Why? No one said that before? Why so surprised, Taeyong gulped when Jungkook suddenly leaned forward, leaving no distance between their faces that he could even smell the berries the other had eaten a few moments ago. In the silence of the eerie jungle, the silver-haired was clearly aware of his loudly beating heart. After the horrible experiences he had at the place, that warmth felt so inviting that he forgot for a moment about his troubled thoughts. "Hyung Dash. I never saw someone as attractive as you, baby." Another nickname, but Taeyong was still in the same position, not knowing what to do or how to respond to the sudden words. "You're like a bright light, attracting every fiber of my body, and now I can't deny it anymore." The silver-haired gulped thickly when Jungkook husked, pulling back his hand to replace it with his mouth. "I never felt like that before, puppy." His words sounded very genuine and Taeyong felt like melting under the touch, something he never had before. When he didn't move or push the older away, Jungkook gathered more courage and softly brushed his lips near his temple, pecking the warm skin so gently like he was touching something very fragile. As the soft brush continued, Taehyung felt his heartbeat increasing at an alarming pace, something weird going wild in his stomach, but still, he didn't push the other like before. When Jungkook noticed the stiffness of the younger, he sadly smiled before pulling back, not before pecking the smooth skin for the last time. "I'm sorry, I did it again." This time, his voice came out clearly disappointed and sad, making the younger feel odd. He silently watched as Jungkook scooted away before taking the other corner of the mattress and leaning back on the wall, closing his eyes. Taehyung blinked, breaking his trance when he heard a soft sigh from the other. Daylight was enough to make his features gleam perfectly, and to his guilt, the other looked quite sad and dejected. He opened his mouth but nothing came out, not sure how to tell the other how he feel. It was still confusing to him, and the situation just made it worse. After another long moment of silence, he finally decided to change the atmosphere again. Hyung, did you ever try to break this locked door?" He pointed towards the other door inside the cabin that was locked. Jungkook followed his finger and nodded lightly. "Yes, I tried a few times but stopped eventually." "Oh, okay." Another wave of awkward silence suffocated the little space, making Taehyung more uncomfortable because Jungkook just kept his eyes close. When the older woke up in the morning, Taehyung announced that they won't try to escape for at least 3 days, so that the other can heal in this span. But right now he felt suffocated and just wanted to run away. "I was in high school when my parents abandoned me, saying that I'm a disgrace for not liking girls," Jungkook uttered, breaking not only the silence but the other's well-built wall as well. Taehyung started fumbling with his shirt when Jungkook took a deep breath before opening his eyes and looking up at the wooden ceiling of the cabin. "Since then I was independent, surviving on my own. I was going here and there in search of a place to live and did many part-time jobs to complete my degree. During that time someone caught my heart, but he rejected me, saying that I had nothing. It was so difficult. So difficult to survive on my own." The pain in that voice stabbed the younger directly in his heart. Even when he was also living alone, he has very supportive friends who never left him alone to suffer in any situation, and he never suffered from heartbreak. "After a year of getting my degree, I finally found a stable job at a small company, got a small but cozy apartment to live in peace, and made a few friends as well." A small curve formed on the corner of his lips as he continued and mentioned his friends. "You must be missing them a lot." Taehyung blurted out but didn't regret it when Jungkook finally turned his face to look into his eyes. "I did, but now I feel different. I feel something that never happened before." Again he averted his gaze and started picking up the skin near his nails. "I still want to get out of this place and live normally. I still want to be back to my life, but..." He again stopped, and Taehyung got panicked when he noticed something falling from the other's eyes. "Hyung dash. You can't understand me, Taehyung. It's getting very difficult for me now. In my whole life no one ever attracted me as you do. I know I'm making you uncomfortable and the situations aren't the best either, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. You deserve to know about how I feel towards you." He breathed out, voice getting shaky with every word. Taehyung licked his lips nervously because the other was now crying, his tears falling like heavy stones directly into his heart. "Hyung dash. Why no one understands me? Why did no one give me a chance? Why I can't have a normal life like others?" The silver-haired was taken aback by the sudden outburst. Clenched fists of the older collided with the mattress, producing a soft thump, but the pain echoed in the whole cabin. Taehyung felt like crying because, in the past days, it was the first time the other let out his bottled-up frustration. But at the same time, he felt a bit happy because the older was finally opening up to him. Smiling a bit, he stretched his hand to grab the other's and softly squeezed it, feeling the same weird feeling in his stomach when the other looked up at him with teary eyes. "Let me try to understand you, Hyung." He breathed out, voice raspy with emotions he suddenly felt. He was ready to do so, not out of guilt but because he was really feeling something inside his heart and body. The closeness always made him kind of jittery. Those soft and gentle touches made him feel special, and the nicknames gave him warmth. He never fell in love before, but if the other was trying to make him feel this amazing emotion, he was ready. Jungkook inhaled sharply when the younger softly brushed his fingers over his cheeks to remove the tears. "I'll try to stay with you as far as I can. If you consider me as your hope ray." I'll be the one and never let you fall into the darkness." Hearing that, Jungkook's lips wobbled, showing his vulnerable side, but he didn't care and let the younger engulf him in a very welcoming and warm embrace. I really like you, puppy. I really do. Even in this short span of time, I fell hard for your innocent heart." Taeyong smiled lightly, wrapping his arms more tightly around the other's neck, and nodded his head. I like your presence as well, Hyung. You are the reason I'm alive in this cursed place." Jungkook tightened his grip around his waist and nuzzled his nose in the crook of his neck, breathing out like a whisper. "And I want to stay the same."